Hello, and welcome to the 11th edition of Placemakers, a speaker series presented by Calgary Municipal Land Corporation. Before we get started today, I'd like to let you know that we have American Sign Language interpreters, and they will be interpreting during this session. Thank you to both Carla and Helen for your support today. Please note the live transcription services are available. There is a live transcript button along the menu at the bottom that can be enabled. My name is Amber Osadan-Ullman. I am the Director of Development at Calgary Municipal Land Corporation, and I will be your panel moderator today. I'd like to start our session with a land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that our work in the Rivers District is located at the confluence of the Bow and Elbow Rivers in a place called McCannell. A Blackfoot word that means elbow. It is in the spirit of truth, respect, and reciprocity that we honor, acknowledge McCannell and recognize the traditional territories and oral practices of the Blackfoot Confederacy, including Siksika, Bakani, and Kainai Nations, the Stoney Nakoda, including Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley Nations, and the Tsuut'ina Nation. Southern Alberta is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. All right, so now to go through some housekeeping items. At this time and throughout the presentations, the chat function has been disabled. Today's event will feature 2 presentations followed by Q&A, where participants can share their questions via our chat forum for each of our speakers. This session is being recorded and will be shared on the CMLC website soon. CMLC started Placemakers as an opportunity to profile all the various aspects of community building over the past few years. We've hosted these events to showcase everything from heritage building restoration, retail development, public space development, and the building of a new library. CMLC is in the enviable position of having been able to deliver projects like the revitalization of East Village, including Central Library, Platform Innovation Center, and our leadership of Calgary's Culture and Entertainment District and the Arts Commons Transformation Project. We're now embarking on a process to incorporate IDEAS principles. IDEAS being an acronym for diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and sustainability, into all that we do in our workplace and in our partnerships and our community activations, and in the projects we're bringing to life all around Calgary. To this end, we've established the following corporate idea statements that will underpin all of our work from this point forward. We commit to deepening our understanding of the vast diversity of human experiences, backgrounds, abilities, and viewpoints. We endeavor to ensure that every perspective is valued and respected in our workplace, our redevelopment efforts, and the communities we work and live in. And with this, I'm pleased to welcome our very first speaker today, Leanne Squair, Accessibility and Disability Consultant. Leanne has recently retired from her issue status position at the City of Calgary that provided leadership for the 11 community members who make up the City of Calgary's Advisory Committee on Accessibility. With her support of the City of Calgary's Council Advisory Committee on Accessibility, the members worked with the city to make sure all city projects have universal design components for people with hearing, vision, cognitive, and physical disabilities. A number of these projects included the Central Library, Platform, and the 9th Ave Parkade, and the Arts Commons Transformation Project. She supports scholarly achievements through her involvement with Alberta Parks and Recreation Association Awards and scholarships programs for individuals studying in the field of sport, recreation, and rehabilitation for people with disabilities. For 30 years, Leanne has worked with the Rick Hansen Foundation on the vision of an accessible society. Leanne also participates as an advisor on the Accessible Renovations for Kids Board and the YYC Accessibility Advisory Committee. Holy smokes, Leanne, we are lucky to have you here today. I'd like you to welcome you to the panel, and I will hand it over to you to start your presentation.
Thank you very much, Amber, and it's really lovely to be here with all of you today. Good afternoon, and thank you for this wonderful opportunity. As Amber mentioned, I recently retired from the city of Calgary, where I spent a lot of my career there supporting accessibility, whether it be for recreation programs, rec facilities, but in the last 20 years did the issue strategy position that worked on policy and strategy for people with disabilities pertaining to our city's program and services. I've worked with CMLC as a partner in a number of different projects, and they've been a keen partner as far as being willing to learn and willing to collaborate with all the city partners. So it excites me today to be able to share some of my stories and thoughts with respect to some of the projects we've worked on. I also wanted to share that my first job in Calgary was working on the Rick Hansen Man in Motion World Tour, which opened my eyes to the commitment that the Rick Hansen Foundation and Rick himself have for not just a city or a country, but on the international stage, making sure that we're thinking about the needs of people with disabilities and removing barriers and all the things we try to do, making sure we have a more inclusive society. I've got personal experience right now dealing with aging parents. I have a mother who's 86 and a father who's 87. And I felt in the last couple of months as I've been looking after them that my life's work has really prepared me for this wonderful gift and opportunity I have with my parents. My mom is now blind in her left eye and has dementia and mobility issues. And my father has heart issues and mobility issues. And I feel so prepared as far as the equipment I need to get for them, but also how I can help them with their daily living. So I wanted to share that because I know a lot of people go through different times in their life where they need to help people with accessibility. And sometimes it's the first time that they realize that our cities aren't very accessible. So, go from there. What I worked on a number of years, and we're on the city's on its sixth iteration of the Access Design Standards. And the Access Design Standards takes the National Building Code to the Provincial Building Code, and then municipalities in Alberta are able to design them to be their own and function in as far as what each of our cities in this province want to do. It goes above and beyond, especially for people with hearing and vision disabilities. And with this latest iteration that'll be published at some point this year, we've taken the Rick Hansen Foundation Accessibility Accreditation, which aligns very well with our Access Design Standards and Canadian Standards Association B651, which has a lot of accessibility features. And we're combining all of those things, and they're all really good tools to use from an accessibility perspective. I also find that Canadian National Institute for the Blind also has an excellent document, Clearing Our Path, which provides some great guidance on what to do with people who are blind and have vision loss. So I would send that one your way as well for people that are looking at designing. At the city, we also made sure that we had it in all our procurement processes, which is something I really encourage a lot of businesses to do as well, and making sure that they have access to the Access Design Standards, they use them, and that they're working closely with the project managers of the city that are doing a lot of the infrastructure work. And it's just an accountability piece that has really helped people become aware of the Access Design Standards, but also use them. It includes not only the physical infrastructure of city buildings, but also the immediate area right outside of buildings. So parking lots, access to the parking lot, having a clear path of travel, having a walkway, sidewalk, making sure the landscaping is out of the way of the path of travel, but also making sure that the ramps are adequate for the parking lot, but also for the sidewalks outside of the building. I think what we've done a better job of every time we've written the access design standards is making sure that we have cross-disability representation. I think the initial additions focus mainly on people with mobility disabilities, because that's what a lot of the codes of the past focus on. But now we're looking at not only people with hearing and vision loss, but we're also looking at what are the needs of individuals with autism, because autism is quite great in our community, and it's something we need to think about further when we design different standards in the future. Next slide, please. So some of the background and history of the access design standards was the first one was in 1988. And so 34 years after the first edition, the City of Calgary is putting together its next iteration. And we need to remember that building code is minimum standards, and all of us that work in the field know that minimum standard isn't good enough for a lot of people with disabilities. So the city's access design standards allow us to go above and beyond the building code. And we want to ensure that no standard is in conflict with any of the code articles. Relevant trends in the last couple of years that I've seen that haven't been included in building code per se or the access design standards are some of the different designs of our sidewalk patios, some of the way we have pedestrian walkways going across and around patios. We haven't necessarily designed for, so that's something new that we've had to incorporate. One of the other areas that is quite big in a lot of cities are cycle tracks. And it's how to incorporate cycle tracks outside of the built environment, but also cycle tracks that are at interconnecting with intersections and patios and other bike connections that are going in different directions. So those are things that we've just had, come into our cities in the last few years that we've really had to think about as far as incorporation into the access design standards. Next slide, please. Some of the trends and new developments that we're looking at is creating environments with no barriers in everything we do, so that all members of society can access the community amenities that we have. 15 to 20% of Calgary's population has some form of disability. So this is significant. We need to think from a cross-disability perspective. The way places are designed affects our ability to move, to see, to hear, and communicate effectively. So we've really got to think about it. Inclusive design allows barriers to be removed from a particular area that's being designed and create undue effort and separation for individuals with disabilities. It enables everyone to participate equally, confidently, and independently in everyday activities. Next slide, please. So some of the significant changes that have happened with the access design standards and the building code that's been really beneficial for people with disabilities are the accessible parking within 50 meters of a building entrance, dedicated guide dog relieving areas in a lot of larger facilities, and you're going to be seeing more and more of these in our city's larger facilities, but also in a lot more airports in Canada and the US. We also, something that's really a benefit is having not just the main entrance, which code dictated in the past, but having all barrier-free entrances have power door operators, because somebody in a mobility device shouldn't have to go to the main entrance. They should be able to get through any entrance of that building with a power assisted door. We also have done a really good job of having assisted listening devices. All our information counters, we've got them at all our Calgary police stations, and also all our recreation facilities, which has been really helpful for people that have hearing loss. And we haven't always thought about people with hearing loss in a big way when we've designed a lot of our buildings in the past. We also have a population of people age 65 and over that is expected to triple in the future, that are going to have all kinds of accessibility issues. So whatever we're building now, there's going to be a huge number of people that are going to benefit from it. This increase will make the need for people with disabilities to need accessible buildings and services all the more pressing. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier on in my presentation, I've had the opportunity to work with CMLC on a number of projects from the beginnings of the East Village being revitalized, and we learned a lot of things as far as not putting bollards in the middle of intersection crossings for people in mobility devices, making sure we have a clear path of travel, making sure that we've designed it so there's clear definition between sidewalk curb cuts and the wheelchair ramps. And CMLC has always been very receptive, and we're all learning on this journey, and I think they've been great partners to work with. We have one of the things that we've learned over the years is it's advisable to hire a really good accessibility consultant for projects. We the biggest project that we worked on so far was the new Calgary Public Library. A challenge because it's over an LRT line, but we incorporated many great things like open washroom design, the 1 in 20 ramp on the west side of the building, assistive listening devices in the theater. And after it opened and we realized some people would be challenged to either use the elevator on the east side or the ramp on the west side, we've got a system where a buzzer gets pushed at the entry level at ground level, and a security person will come and help someone, and there's a elevator right there that will get them up. So just willing to roll with the punches once facilities are open, and I think that's fantastic. The project we worked on with the BMO Convention Center, it's got contrasting floors to pillars, whether it be the tile or the carpeting, universally designed washroom with a adult change table, which is one of the first in a CMLC project, which I think is fantastic. Arts Commons transformation. We have CMLC and their partners are committed to creating a diverse and inclusive and welcoming place for everyone. So they've really paid attention to details, accessible seating, assistive listening devices, and also accessibility in the performing arts area. And we, Amber mentioned the 9th Avenue Platform Innovation Center. We really worked hard on the accessible parking and making sure it's close to the elevator, but it's also safe. So people using mobility devices don't have to go into the line of traffic. There's lower desks in the technology area for people with mobility devices to pull right in and work with. And the 17th Avenue Southeast LRT extension and pathway has been a huge project that has a lot of moving parts that's worked really effectively to make sure that we've got safety at the new at-grade LRT station that will be built. And we've got tactile warning surface indicators before you cross the track. We've got gate arms, and we've got bells, and we've got flashing lights. So those 4 things are all new to the LRT system for an at-grade station. We've also made sure there's barrier-free pathways along the between the station and McLeod Trail crossing, but also from the station all the way to the new BMO Convention Center, and then carrying on through Stampede Grounds to Stampede Trail. So those are all things that I've worked on, that CMLC has been committed to. Next slide, please. The other piece that people may not be familiar of, but CMLC has an accessibility working group that's made out of people that have an inherent interest in accessibility and barrier-free design and universal design. And it's made up of staff from CMLC, community members, and people with disabilities. And it supports CMLC's strategic priorities. It also provides leadership in promoting the implementation of the universal design priorities in CMLC's projects. This group has identified common challenges and opportunities with community stakeholders. They've established mechanisms to communicate, raise awareness of initiatives and opportunities. They've also provided the facilitation of an education campaign, advocacy, and procurement processes, along with contractual obligations. And they're committed to global best practices. And I think this is something that I commend CMLC for. As Amber mentioned, the City of Calgary has an advisory committee on accessibility that focuses on broad policy issues and advises council on accessibility and other issues related to municipal needs of people with disabilities. And they've been key from a cross-disability perspective as far as reviewing and providing recommendations on CMLC projects. They provide the lived experience insights into city projects, planning, designs, and work as a close partner with CMLC. Next slide. And all these are projects that we've worked on, and if you haven't seen some of the slides, they've been able to capture a lot of the accessibility pieces that have been put into all of the projects that CMLC has worked on with the City of Calgary and the Advisory Committee on Accessibility. Next slide. And down the ramps will be tactile warning surface indicators every 9 meters so that people with vision loss will know when they're heading down a ramp. And it's going to be one of the latest and greatest LRT platforms that will accommodate a lot of people. So next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. And it's been really enjoyable sharing this presentation with you on the accessibility access design standards that the City of Calgary has, that orchestrates and make sure that we have accessible infrastructure, and also working with CMLC on doing the same. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
Leanne, thank you so much for that. I thought your comments and examples of the cycle tracks or the patio, for example, being temporary public realm infrastructure, we of course need to also think about that in terms of universal and accessible design. So I want to get into more of that with you once we get to the Q&A. So right now I will introduce our next speaker. We have Brad McCannell. Brad is the Vice President for Access and Inclusion at the Rick Hansen Foundation. As a leader in the field of accessibility for the past 27 years, Brad has extensive experience in the practical application of universal design across the whole built environment, providing accessibility consultations globally. Projects include the 2008 Beijing Olympic and Paralympic Summer Games, the International Paralympic Committee's Technical Working Group on Accessibility, Malaysia's Kuala Lumpur's International Airport, the NASA International Airport, along with many Vancouver area landmarks, including Vancouver's International Airport, Vancouver's Rogers Arena, Richmond's Olympic Oval, the University of British Columbia, Vancouver Island University, the Vancouver Convention Center, BC Ferries, the 2010 Winter Olympic and Paralympic Games, among others. Brad is also a member of the Accessibility Standards Canada Board, which is tasked with the development of accessibility standards for the federal government of Canada in collaboration with industry and disability community. He also provides recommendations for accessibility standards via the International Standards Organization Technical Management Board Strategic Advisory Group on Accessibility, in addition to addressing monitoring key issues in industry. Holy moly to you too, Brad. Welcome to the panel. I will hand it over to you to take it away.
Good gracious, I'm busy. Well, thank you for that kind introduction. For those of you unable to access a monitor, I'm a 69-year-old white male wearing a blue jacket, coming to you from my home office in beautiful downtown Pender Harbor on the west coast of British Columbia. I identify as he, him, and I've been a wheelchair user for 42 years now, and I use a service dog on a daily basis, Sam the Wonder Dog. For the last 6 years, as mentioned, I've been the Vice President of Access and Inclusion for the Rick Hansen Foundation, and I was brought on to lead the team to develop the Rick Hansen Foundation Accessibility Certification Program. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, but for 25 years before that, I was a consultant, professional consultant, independent, working in the field, working on mega projects, typically like Beijing, 2008 Games in Beijing, the 2010 Games in Olympic and Winter. I can't even say it, it's so exciting. The 2010 Olympic and Paralympic Games here in Vancouver as the primary access consultant for all venues and events. But I also worked on corner stores and bakeries, and even all the way down to designing accessible baggage carts. The one thing all those projects share, big and small, is a commitment to understanding what meaningful access means to their businesses, to their organizations, to their products. So for today's session, what I'm going to hope to do is kind of put a face to disability a little bit so we understand who we're actually talking about. I want to help you understand what meaningful access can deliver, and maybe even help you understand why we get all the good parking spots. I'm not going to talk a lot about the Rick Hansen Foundation itself. I think the best way to do that is for you to go to rickhansen.com, and it's a plethora of information about schools programs and our RHFAC program and accessibility in general. I'll just say that our vision at the Rick Hansen Foundation is to create an inclusive world where people with disabilities are living to their full potential. And for us, that means, beginning with the accessible built environment. You know, if you can't just jump in your car or hail a taxi or grab a bus and go downtown, maybe visit a local pub or restaurant, go get a passport, join a protest, or even just go visit a buddy. If you can't do all those things, then you don't have full citizenship. And that's what people with disabilities live with every day. So at RHF, our mission is to remove barriers to people with disability. To do that, we undertook a global review of other people's initiatives. What are they doing in Australia, Ireland, Iceland? What's Australia doing? What's New York doing? And it revealed to us that of all the pillars of accessibility, communications, web access, transportation, employment, of all those pillars, where we can have the biggest impact was, in fact, the built environment. Because without an accessible built environment, none of those other pillars can thrive. The need for accessible transportation is diminished if there are no accessible destinations. And even the most robust employment equity program will fail if I can't get in the building. So we saw that the immediate problem was this massive gap between building code and the real needs of the community of people with disability. The other thing we noticed right away is that this gap was largely generated by a misunderstanding of who people with disabilities really are. You know, the greatest barrier to people with disabilities is now and always has been the attitudinal barrier. Preconceived notions of what people with disabilities are capable of, and indeed who we actually are. Part of this problem is shown up by the way people with disabilities are siloed. You know, policymakers tend to address issues in silos. They look for solutions for poverty reduction. They look for solutions on supporting Indigenous communities. They look at ways of resolving issues for the BIPOC community. And they look at ways of supporting people with disabilities. But the great flaw in that approach is that it's not recognized that people with disabilities are part of all of those groups. We're not a homogenous group you can just deal with separately. You can deal with after the fact, like it's landscape. So who are people with disabilities then? Change slide for me, please. Yeah, let's go to the next one. I thought that one was out. So who are people with disabilities then? So this is one of the core problems in the industry, in your industry today, because typically your industry views access as being about a few wheelchair users. And this might seem a little bit odd coming from a wheelchair user, but whoa, those wheelchair guys. They've dominated the discussion since day one. We've dominated the codes, we've dominated the regulations. If you ask a person on the street about disability, the first thing that'll pop into their head is a wheelchair. The international symbol for people with disabilities is a wheelchair, and yet we represent around 30% of the population of people with disabilities. So the problem is codes reflect that. Codes have a mobility bias, as Leanne mentioned. So that means if you're operating under a code minimum access strategy, you're missing about 70% of the community and their needs, but you're also missing about 70% of the return on investment that's available when you create meaningful access in the built environment. So the focus has to be broadened. It has to be about people with hearing loss and people with vision loss, cognitive impairments, neurodiversity. It has to be recognized that people with disabilities are the largest minority group in the world. The World Health Organization estimates that we're about 1.3 billion people in the world have disabilities, which incidentally is a larger market than China. And yet somehow we're still considered non-market. Someone will have to explain that to me one day. But not only are they the largest minority group in the world, we're the only minority group that any of you can join at any moment. It could be a medical condition, it could be a fall down the stairs, it could be a car accident, it could be a twisted ankle. And that's because you're what we call tabs. You see, we got names for you too. You are temporarily able-bodied. It doesn't matter whether you do a face plant when you're a teenager and you end up in a wheelchair, or you're 65 and you need a hearing aid and a walker. You are going to experience disability. The only question is when and for how long. Next slide, please. Right now in Canada, 24% of the population reports having a significant disability. Reports is a very key word there, because there's tens of thousands of people who don't report for all kinds of different reasons. But let's just stay with the 24% for now. Obviously, that 24% of the population benefits from a universal, barrier-free, accessible environment. But all of us have at least one other person in our lives that also benefits. Mother, father, sister, brother, neighbor, lover, even if it's a paid caregiver. Heck, even if it's a paid lover. Everybody has at least one other person in their life that also benefits from a barrier-free environment, an accessible environment. So it's not 24% of the population that disability touches. It's at least 50. I would argue that it's 60 or 75% because I, for one, have more than one person in my life that also benefits. And they benefit in a couple of ways, not only because anything that's accessible is good for me and therefore because they love me, it's good for them, but also because it's safer for them. If they're helping me transfer them onto a bed or onto a toilet or even just pushing me into a movie theater, the more accessible it is, the less stress it is on them, the less chance of them getting injured while they're trying to help me. On top of that, there's the older adults and seniors, what we lovingly call the silver tsunami, the wave of people coming that are just changing all of our stats. 1,000 people turn 65 every single day in Canada. 240,000 people retire every year in Canada. And the thing about seniors and older adults is they don't have a disability, they have multiple disabilities. They have hearing loss combined with mobility or vision loss compared with cognitive issues or any combination you can think of. And it's not limited to one or two. The other thing about people with disabilities, in addition to having older adults and seniors having multiple disabilities, is that they are in complete denial about those disabilities. You've heard it. My eyes are fine, my arms aren't long enough. Or the classic, I can hear fine if you'd stop mumbling. The joke in our industry is older adults and seniors do not have disabilities and they will hit you with their canes if you say they do. I have to tell you about my mom. My mom is not with me anymore, but when she was 85, she used a walker, couldn't go more than 50 feet without sitting down, had terrible vision, and her hearing was actually worse. But she didn't, she felt sorry for me because I had a disability. It's not like I use a wheelchair, she'd say. Oh, Mom, it'd be way better if you used a wheelchair. You'd be so much safer. You wouldn't have to worry about falling. You wouldn't have to worry about sitting down every 50 feet. Get one of those scooters with the sidewalls and the windshield wipers and would terrorize the sidewalks. It'd be better for you, be safer for you, but she won't because of the stigma. My brothers and I wanted to put a grab bar in her shower. Absolutely not, she'd say. Mom, why? Well, because what if somebody sees it? They'll think I'm disabled. So that begs two questions. Number one, Mom, who are you showering with? And number two, you would jeopardize your personal safety over the look of something? And the answer is an unqualified yes. Mom won't use what she calls handicapped cabs. She thinks they're fabulous for me, but they have that little blue wheelchair guy on it, the international symbol. Mom will not be labeled disabled. Mom's not disabled. She's just getting older. And that's the attitude. So from a design perspective, from an operating perspective, from our perspective, the people on this call, access not only has to be effective, but it has to be invisible. It has to be beautiful. It has to be normal, which is fortunate because those are all the things that accessible design delivers. Next slide, please. When you look at the numbers, they're already being driven by this silver tsunami. According to an Angus Reid poll, 30% of people in the general population already consider accessibility when deciding on where they're going to go, where they're going to go for a restaurant, where they're going to go buy whatever they want to buy. 30% today. And 21% already support an accessible certification program like the Hansen program, which is remarkable because our program is an industry program, not a consumer program. So it's not that well known in the general public, and yet already 21% see the value. So with all that being said, and this is kind of where you come in, the built environment is the key to creating full citizenship. That's part of that being, being a citizen, part of being a member of the community is having a job. Next slide, please. So why is employment so important to the community of people with disabilities? Next slide. According to the Conference Board of Canada, 57% of people who are ready, willing, and able to work in our community, so not the whole community, because some people with disabilities, it's not realistic for them to work. But for the ones that are, 57% of us are unemployed or underemployed. 57%. We asked the Conference Board of Canada if just the commercial and retail spaces were made accessible to our minimum standard. Just set aside all the other built environments. It's just go commercial and retail. If they were accessible to our minimum level, what would that mean economically? And for the first time, we've got a number. $16.8 billion to the gross domestic product if those spaces were accessible. Now, I know that if there was $16 billion buried out in the road somewhere, we would go get it. And if we need to develop a special tool to do that, like the Rick Hansen Foundation Accessibility Certification Program, if we needed a special tool, we would develop that tool. And if we needed special training to operate that tool, then we would get that training, but we would not leave $16 billion in the roadway. And yet We do that. We do that by not creating accessible environments. That's why the built environment became such a focus for us. Employment is the holy grail in our community. When people with disabilities have jobs, we have bank accounts, we have credit cards. And we have bank accounts and credit cards, we can get mortgages. And so suddenly we're part of the market. Builders will start building homes that work for us instead of against us. Retailers will want our business as much as they want any business, so they will become accessible. We want to be part of their business plan. Not to mention all the other benefits that come with employment. You know, it's more than just a paycheck. It's the opportunity to contribute. It's to feel valued. It's to create that social interaction and be part of a solution instead of part of a perceived problem. So the fastest way to create employment is to create an accessible workplaces in the retail and commercial spaces. And the fastest way to do that is the RHFAC, the Rick Hansen Foundation Accessibility Certification Program. Next slide, please. The RHFAC is a reference standard. It's not a prescriptive standard. But the real power of our program is that it has an ability to create common language and common methodology along with standardized training to rate the built environment. Right now, everybody's using their own checklists. Most of them derive from the ADA. Some of them are building code ones, but they're all over the place. They're working under different standards, different codes, different provincial requirements. They're working under personal preference of maybe an architect or advisory committee. And many of them are doing a very, very good job. Unfortunately, we can't measure it because they're all using different definitions. It's all becomes anecdotal information instead of usable data that can drive the whole notion forward. We can't compare building to building because they're not using the same language. The RHFAC enables that. The RHFAC enables you to compare a building locally, nationally, provincially, even internationally, because everybody's using the same language, same methodology. It's a critical way of measuring the built environment. Because the next time someone says to you, we want our building to be accessible. Well, the next question out of your mouth has to be accessible to who? Wheelchair users? People who are blind? People who are deaf? People with cognitive issues? Even within any of those segments. Okay, I want my building to be wheelchair accessible. Okay, do you mean wheelchair accessible to Rick Hansen, the guy who rolled around the world? Or do you want it to be accessible to Brad McCannell and his mom? You know, we look at a 1 in 12 ramp and we start writing out our will. 1 in 12 ramp's not accessible. I know it's code. I know it's okay under the code. But imagine my darling mother on her walker on a 1 in 12 ramp. And remember that it's going down the ramp that's the problem. Everybody thinks it's going up the ramp. Oh, it's too steep. No, it's going down. Remember that if you fall going up a ramp, you hurt your knee. If you fall going down, it's a head injury. So it's really important to understand how this all interacts. At the Rick Hansen Foundation, we've been quite successful at demonstrating the return on investment. We rated over 1,600 locations. We've trained over 350 working professionals, taken our course to understand how to use the tool. And because of that, we can generate really significant data analysis and data mining. We can compare projects. We can see where we're starting from or how well we've done because we have a starting point. The RHFAC is not the code police. We identify what's actually there and who it affects. Because what that does is it gives you a place to measure from. The current practice, on at least at a federal level, is to measure access by the number of barriers removed. Well, I would argue that people with disabilities don't care about the number of barriers removed. We care about the number of barriers that remain. And that can't be measured unless you have a starting point, unless you've had your site or your plan or your project assessed as part of the RHFAC as a national and international program. It takes 3 things to create meaningful access. And I've said meaningful access many times now. What I mean by meaningful access is the whole experience. Right now, what happens is a facility operator will go with a checklist and say, oh, I'll go to the bathroom and say, oh, look, I got grab bars, check. I got an oversized stall, check. I got paper towel in the right location, check. So I must have a pretty accessible washroom. And then they walk over to the elevators. Oh, look, we got light colored floors, check. We got a handrail, check. We got braille on the buttons, check. So we must be a pretty accessible facility. No, you have a washroom and an elevator. Nobody checked the front door. Nobody checked the connecting pathways. Nobody looked to see if a person could work there. So understanding the holistic experience is, as a person with a disability, I need to know if I can get in the building. And the moment I get out of my car, get off the car, get out of a cab or off a bus or just walking down the street, can I go through the front door? Can I work my way to the reception? Can I use the facility? That's what meaningful access is, not whether your washroom's accessible. It takes three things to create that meaningful access. As I said earlier, you have to know who people with disabilities actually are. It's more than just wheelchairs. You have to move accessibility up the design and management policy food chain. We have to deal with these issues earlier, not after. People right now design a building, get it permitted, pour concrete, and then phone Leanne and I and say, can we make this accessible? No, I can't. I can do what we call bolt-on access. I can throw on a power door, or I can put a ramp on the side of the building to overcome a grand staircase you put on the front of the building for some reason. I would argue with 50% of the population being affected by barriers in the built environment, that there's no such thing as a grand staircase. That's another discussion for another day. The third element is you have to professionalize the delivery of accessible design, and that's what the RHFAC does. It gives industry a reliable source of information, consistent information based on international standards. So this is not about somebody else. Your tabs, it's about you, it's about your family, it's about your moms. You need to push it, accessible design up the food chain. You need to learn to ask a question for every project. How will this affect people with disability? Doesn't matter whether you're buying business cards, buying a refrigerator for the lunchroom, buying new furniture for the staff room, or building a new library. How will this affect people with disabilities? Do you need Braille on the business cards? You might not. It's hard to believe why you might not, but you may not. But did you ask the question? When you bought the fridge for the staff room, did it have double doors? Or is it the conventional fridge with a freezer up top that I can't reach? Did you ask the question? Every site's different. Every application is different. There's no set of rules that are going to get you through this. You have to understand for your site, for that application, for that day, what is the practical application of universal design here? Practical application of universal design. Remember that universal design is a concept. It's not a list of prescriptive solutions. It doesn't tell you how wide a door should be. It tells you should have equitable use. So that's my presentation. I wanted to keep it big and broad. I wanted to put a face to disability, and I hope I've done that. This is how we change the world. Thank you for your time.
Brad, that was excellent. Thank you so much for that. I really liked your comment about how everyone is temporarily able-bodied. We're going to move to the Q&A session in this portion of the panel. But before we do, I just wanted to let audience members know, if you do have a question for Brad or Leanne, you'll see at the very bottom of the screen that there is a Q&A button. You could just type your question through that pop-up and it will come directly over to us. So just right off the hop, Brad, something you were saying really made me think something that we do quite a bit at CMLC in terms of city building and placemaking is we think about the lived experience of if somebody's going to go down to a space or visit a business, they've already gone on that journey mentally. Can I get there? What is that experience? Is it beautiful? And then to your point, is it accessible? They've already made that decision of, am I going to go ahead and do that? Considering the amount of work and cost and of course the embodied carbon of all the infrastructure that goes into the cities and to buildings, what would you say Would you describe, I guess, accessible design as an evolving practice, and how would you advise clients or consultants or owners about how to incorporate and think about accessible design as an evolving practice?
Oh, they need to understand that it's one of the things we do too often is retrofit existing building or brand new buildings. They need to understand right from the very first design project, the very first design venue or charrette, what they're doing and who they're designing for. And that's not what happens right now. And so understanding that there's no one size fits all solution, that their project is unique and the principles of universal design will apply, but how that's practically done is going to be different from site to site, but it needs to be considered earlier in the process.
Mm-hmm.
If it's an existing building, then it's a bigger challenge. But at the same time, there's really important basics. Like, for example, the building code works really hard at getting people with using wheeled mobility devices, wheelchairs, get us into a building. Works really hard at that. But it doesn't care about getting us out in an emergency. So egress is not required to be accessible. The next time you're standing in front of an elevator and you see that little plaque that says, in case of fire, take stairs. Where's the little plaque that tells me what to do? So understanding these giant gaps, understanding how it impacts the building, that's really critically important. And not to sound like a commercial for the RHFAC, but that's what it does. It gives you that baseline. You can create that baseline without us if you have a skilled professional on site like Leanne or other access professional, but make sure that there's an access professional part of the design team right from day one, or the renovation team, or even from an operations perspective. Having that lived experience injected into your policy is the only way to move forward.
I love that, Brad. Before I jump in, Leanne, do you have any comments on that?
I think it is starting at the beginning, and it is involving the cross-disability perspective on the team. But I think it goes all the way to having more programs at our post-secondary institutions that work in the training of architects, planners, designers, engineers, and having more universal design information and having a better understanding before they even get out in the world and start working on projects of what it means to have universal design. And it is thinking about it from a cross-disability perspective. It's not just thinking about, as Brad says, the guy in the wheelchair. It's everybody that has some form of disability, because that's what universal design is it's designing so there's no barriers for anyone to participate.
We have this analogy in-house about thinking about when changes come into a project, and to your guys' point about bringing in that design at the very beginning, even just from a cost analysis, if you were to say, we need to make a change on a piece of paper, it's $100. By the time we tender the design, we need to make a change then, it's $1,000. After the building is built and then you go and retrofit it, it's $10,000. It makes so much more sense to bring in someone else's lived experience into the very beginning and forefront thinking of a project. We have a question from the audience here. Is there a perfect example of building in Calgary that hits all the accessibility aspects and meets all of the needs for the users? I want to add to this, or is there a perfect example even of the public realm building or public realm Calgary or Canada?
Perfect? No such thing. No building is fully accessible. You can't be accessible to all people with all disabilities at all times in every occupancy and every site location. One of the things that we stress is the practical application. Is setting a bar that high. It's not realistic. I'll straight up say it. It's just not realistic. However, you can do amazing things, and you can go a long way. Like the Inclusio project in Calgary, we've got a gold rating under our system. Understanding that you can meet 80, 90% of the community, the needs of that community. There are great examples. Vancouver International Airport is a great example of how you can do that and airports are much more difficult space because they're like little cities, right? They have all the problems from transportation to park management to parking, every aspect of the city they deal with. So making that work there, that's a good example of how you have to do a cultural shift within the organization for them to teach them to ask that question I mentioned earlier: how will this affect people with disability? So there's good examples all over the place, but there, the Wavefront facility in Vancouver, which used to be the Western Institute for the Deaf, and they provide services for deaf and hard of hearing. They resisted the temptation to just work on environmental issues for the deaf and hard of hearing, and instead understood that they're going to be dealing with all manner of disabilities because they're going to deal with older adults and seniors. So they did. They actually got the highest rating on our scale ever, 97%, because they addressed those issues. They addressed mobility and hearing and cognitive issues all in their building design.
Yeah, and I think in Calgary, we've done a really good job at our two newest recreation facilities, both Rocky Ridge and Seton, yes. And we've included the needs of a lot of different disabilities in those facilities. The Calgary Public Library has also done a really good job with that. And even though I think people have to remember, even though it got some bad press initially, usually when we build buildings, by the time they're built, they're 2 building codes behind. So we have these expectations that it should be how it should be built the day it opens, but that's not the case. And from some of the things Brad has said, we have to streamline building codes in Canada, and I'm hoping that the Accessibility Standards Canada group that Brad's part of can do that and have it so that it's current, because right now it takes 5 to 10 years for new codes to come in to place on the national level, and that's too long. Like we want action quickly, and we know with some of the trends we're seeing in our communities, there's new things that are coming up all the time. Like, how do we deal with scooters? How do we deal with rental bikes and the barriers that they're causing in our city? So there's new things all the time. And I think we also have the Calgary International Airport is a great building. We also have the CNIB Tower in Edmonton that was designed by an architect who was blind. So we have some different buildings that we can learn from as we move to some of the next projects. The Rick Hansen group has also worked with Climate Change Arena in Seattle, which is fantastic as far as its accessibility, and it should be a lesson for all future arenas and event centers that are built in Canada.
Those are great examples. Thank you guys for that, because I think, and you touched on this, Leanne, earlier when you said we're all learning through this journey. Certainly it's something that, we've been going through, and you put your best foot forward and you open on day one, and then, oh no, you didn't think of this and you need to amend this. And you learn from a lot of these experiences. And to your point, Brad, it certainly, day one is not necessarily the day of opening, meaning the best product and best design that's put forward. Excuse me.
Access is a moving target.
Access is a moving target. I love that. So just in the interest of time, we'll take 2 more questions from the audience. The first one is about maintenance. I think this one's really interesting because right now we're discussing quite a bit in terms of design at the beginning of a project, but after the project's built and the sidewalk, for example, is operating, how can the city or others address snow clearing, for example, and maintenance? So even things like having tree branches low, and if you could potentially walk into a lower tree branch if you have sight disabilities.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Go ahead, Leanne. Go ahead.
Thanks, Brad. I think you've got to think about all those things from a maintenance perspective, and you, like anything you would have as part of your operations, you've got a budget, and accessibility just becomes the way of operating and how we function as a building, and the amenities that we have. And it's something we always need to think about. And, you know, even when we temporarily put up chairs or benches for people to sit, making sure that if we're going to have people that have vision loss or in mobility devices, that we're really thoughtful and planful about how we set those things up, and also taking them down and getting them out of the way. So it's ongoing.
It's all about training. It's all about understanding the real issues. So, you know, here a classic example is a big snowfall comes, and the maintenance guys come out and clear the stairs, and they do that first. But in reality, if they cleared the ramp first, everybody could use it, and you could get to the stairs later. You know, I don't have it handy, or I just put it up. But, you know, one of the classics is in parking lots. They plow out the parking lots, and where do they put the snow? Well, they put it in the disabled parking spot because it's the biggest one. Well, excuse me. So it's understanding how these things are used, and it comes down to training. It comes down to that staff understanding what they're doing has a huge impact on us. You know, if you plow a sidewalk and you successfully leave a bank of snow that I can't get over to get to the sidewalk, or you plow a sidewalk but you don't plow the curb ramp, then you don't need to plow the sidewalk.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I think often, you know, one thing, maybe just to build on that too, with the city or the municipality, they have the opportunity as leaders and ones who typically take on that maintenance to set that standard, hopefully thereby inspiring private landowners.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Well, I was just going to say it's a very big issue, and there's no one solution. There's no easy solution. I feel for that group of people trying to make those maintenance, but so much of it is in the initial design and how you make that easy for them. So for me, it's about training. It's about making sure. People always think, well, it's just architects and planners that need the training. No, it's the people swinging the hammers. It's the people doing the work that need to understand their impact on people with disabilities every day, how they approach. You know, from a janitorial perspective, what kind of finish are you using on the floor? What's the slip coefficient of that? Have you done that, or are you just making it shiny and pretty? So just understanding those things, that's just training. Just training.
Yeah, I think the challenge a lot of cities have now is they're contracting out a lot of services. So it's not necessarily the same guy that's clearing the snow this year that will be clearing the snow next year. So it's having standing operating procedures so that it doesn't matter who is clearing that snow, what contractor, or who's cutting the grass or cleaning a pathway. They have the procedures they have to follow to make things accessible. And
you just get to the procurement guys and say, you know what, slide a line in there that you can't have this contract unless your employees have received disability awareness training. One line, costs you nothing, and they will do it because they want the contract. It becomes part of the culture then. You make it a cultural issue, not, you know what, if you rely on people to remember all this stuff, you'll never get there. You have to shift the culture.
Absolutely, because otherwise we start to operate in a framework that contains a lot of biases, and instead of operating a framework where people have lived experiences that are different than our own, we'll just keep doing the same thing over.
And Leanne was talking about you guys are demonstrating that your culture is shifting. You are making it a priority. And so we're here talking to you. So it shows you are on the right path. It's a long path.
So I'm just going to ask one last question from the audience here, and then we'll conclude the panel discussion. Are there any guidelines or design recommendations for children with disabilities? We often see guidelines for those targeting the age group of 65 or over. Is there anything else for the younger population?
Toronto has a very good plan for daycare centers. Some very interesting specs. I haven't seen anything national. It's one of the subjects we brought up at the Access Canada. We were looking at those for standards, but it's down the road a little bit. But I don't know of any national or even international standard. The International Building Code has some issue or some coverage of this. The International Building Code is quite good on access, by the way. In the United States, states like California, for example, are using it in addition to the ADA. But the ADA is so far outdated now. The last update of the ADA was 2010, so it's way behind the times. So International Building Code is a good place to maybe look for that, or the Toronto daycare requirements. Other than that, I don't know of any. Maybe Leanne does.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it in my presentation, but children that are on the autism spectrum, for example, it's getting an understanding from the organizations that work with them as far as design. And we've done some things as far as the airport, having a quiet area for kids that are really overstimulated by big, large groups of people and loud noises like that are at the airport.
Sure.
The airport also does training where they have individuals come onto the plane that have autism. So they develop a comfort level so that when they take a flight with their family, there's a comfort level there. And it's, you know, thinking as far as baffling rooms in certain facilities, but also making sure that there's universal design change rooms and areas where individuals that are on this spectrum that requires sort of more quiet, more private areas to be with their parent or caregiver have that opportunity. So I usually bring in organizations that work with children specifically, and they help identify what the specific needs are, which help lead to better planning and better design.
Just real quick, I know we're running short on time. Another great resource is the Access Professionals Network. It's an organization of access professionals. They get together and monthly webinars, but it's a great resource because you're talking to all the people who do the actual assessing. So what they've come across, what they've experienced, I would encourage this organization to join the APM, in fact. But usually going there and just attending, and you could post that question and see what happened. Or it sounds to me like it might be a great subject for a webinar, one of the monthly webinars that organization does, just to flesh this out, because I know this is an issue. But just a thought.
Excellent. Well, Brad, Leanne, I think we could probably talk to you guys all day. I still have 10 more questions I didn't get to. So thank you so much for both of your time and for this informative, thought-provoking discussion. As I mentioned earlier to everybody listening in, the recording of this session will be up soon on the CMLC website. Please stay tuned for our next special edition of Placemakers coming this fall. To stay up to date on all of our projects announcements, please subscribe to our newsletter at calgarymlc.ca/newsletter-sign-up. So with that, I thank you all for joining us here today and for listening in, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Bye.